This morning, our top story is the IG report, along with the articles of impeachment. House Democrats are expected to draft 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump today, one relating to abuse of power, the other dealing with obstruction of Congress, with the announcement in the next hour that comes amid the release of the long-awaited Inspector General report, which looked into FISA abuse during the 2016 election. The report found there were failures at the FBI, but also said that the Russia investigation was justified. That investigation meaning collusion with Donald Trump. It found no political bias in the FBI, extraordinarily, given the incredible texts between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page that were quite obvious. The president weighed in yesterday at the White House.
The IG report just came out, and I was just briefed on it, and it's a disgrace what's happened with respect to the things that were done to our country. It should never again happen to another president. It is incredible, far worse than I would have ever thought possible. And it's an embarrassment to our country. It's dishonest. It's everything that a lot of people thought it would be, except far worse.
Joining me right now is Texas Congressman, House Judiciary and Intel Committee member John Ratcliffe. Congressman, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks very much for joining us.
You bet, Maria.
You've been terrific. We've been watching you for the last couple of weeks in terms of the Intel Committee and Judiciary in those impeachment hearings. I'm going to get to that in a moment, but first, give me your reaction to the IG report.
Well, the findings don't match the conclusions. The findings in here are literally an indictment. They find clear, as the Attorney General said, clear FISA abuse, that the FISA court was repeatedly, systematically misled with false statements, misrepresentations, the failure to turn over exculpatory evidence. And really, that's what the Inspector General was supposed to look at, and he did. And I think those findings really are an indictment of Jim Comey's FBI and the leadership there throughout this process. Unfortunately, the headlines focus on the conclusion that he made about the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation, where he said, you know, it was properly predicated and came to that conclusion. I do think it's interesting that immediately we heard from John Durham, who has broader jurisdiction, meaning he has greater ability to reach those conclusions, and said, look, we told the Inspector General there's more there than you're aware of, and our conclusions are going to be different with respect to predication. So unfortunately, I think the headlines really haven't underscored the facts that are contained in the Inspector General's report, which are FISA abuse was very clear, and that this was a clear validation of, as you said earlier, the Nunes memo, and an indictment of Jim Comey's leadership at the FBI throughout the FISA process.
I mean, yourself, Devin Nunes, the two of you have been, for 3 years now, exposing what took place and educating the American people on what took place, where you had people in powerful positions trying to stop a duly elected president. And we thank you for that, Congressman, because you've done an incredible job in educating us. And in fact, the Attorney General said this after the IG report was out. The IG's report now makes clear that the FBI launched an intrusive investigation of a U.S. presidential campaign on the thinnest of suspicions that, in my view, were insufficient to justify the steps taken. It is also clear that from its inception, the evidence produced by the investigation was consistently exculpatory. Nevertheless, the investigation and surveillance was pushed forward for the duration of the campaign and deep into President Trump's administration. In a rush to obtain and maintain FISA surveillance of Trump campaign associates, FBI officials misled the FISA court, omitted critical exculpatory facts from their filings, and suppressed or ignored information negating the reliability of their principal source. The IG found the explanations given for these actions unsatisfactory. While most of the misconduct identified by the IG was committed in 16 and 17 by a small group of now former FBI officials, the malfeasance and misfeasance detailed in the Inspector General's report reflects a clear abuse of the FISA process. What now? I mean, you know, obviously the conclusions, like you said, do not match with what's happening with the findings inside the report. What happens now, Congressman?
Well, I think that Attorney General Barr's summary there really does reflect what is in the Inspector General's report. And even if you concede the conclusion that the very low threshold to start the investigation was properly predicated, which I disagree with. The Attorney General does, and it certainly sounds like John Durham disagrees with it as well. Even if you concede that point, however, starting it is one thing. Continuing it is something else altogether different. And there's nothing in here that would allow this investigation to continue. Almost immediately, undercover FBI agents and confidential human sources were getting exculpatory information. We're getting transcripts that really blew up the underlying predicate, the reason that was supposedly valid for opening that. And yet there was a systematic and continuous effort not to give that information to the FISA court. That was where the FISA court was misled, and that this should not have continued, even if you concede that it could have started. That's what I think John Durham is going to continue to explore. You know, one of the questions that I would have if I were Lindsey Graham tomorrow and I was talking to Michael Horowitz is, how can you say that there's no political bias here when you have one of the lawyers involved with this who doesn't like Donald Trump, and his texts reflect, he says, "Viva la resistance" when Trump gets elected, alters a document to mislead the FISA court? How is that not political bias? That would be my question for Michael Horowitz. And I think those are the types of things that John Durham is looking at as he takes a deeper, broader look into the origins of this.
The president tweeted less than an hour ago, and here's what the president said. "I don't know what report current director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, was reading, but it sure wasn't the one given to me. With that kind of attitude, he will never be able to fix the FBI, which is badly broken, despite having some of the greatest men and women working there." So do you think that Wray is going to be able to fix these issues? Does he keep his job? What's your reaction to the president's tweet?
I was disappointed in how muted Director Wray's comments were. Sort of the, well, we're going to implement this stuff, we need to do better. Look, I was getting calls last night from my former colleagues who, some of whom are at the FBI or used to be at the FBI. They were horrified and dismayed at the findings in here. They could not believe the level and efforts of some at the FBI to continue a counterintelligence investigation against a president where there was no predicate to continue it. You know, I think one of the other things that's interesting that no one has focused on here is within 5 days, on August 4th, 5 days after this supposedly properly predicated investigation was opened by the Obama administration, 5 days later, John Brennan spoke to his Russian counterpart, the head of Russian intelligence, and said, "We know what you're doing. Cut it out, knock it off." A month after that, President Obama spoke directly with Vladimir Putin and said, "We know what you're doing, knock it off." So the Obama administration immediately let the Russians know that what they were up to and that there was interference in the election, but they never told the Trump campaign. They never briefed Donald Trump as the candidate. I think that's one of the issues that John Durham is looking at, and one of the reasons that there's concern here about bias as it went to how this was opened, and why he's going back and looking at some of the intelligence agency involvement in this.
And John Durham, of course, his investigation is a criminal investigation. And you wouldn't have a criminal investigation if you didn't think that there was criminal activity happening. But what are you going to do about it, Congressman? I mean, look, we know how deep-rooted this has gone, and yet Jim Comey is out and about saying it's all lies, none of it is true, I'm vindicated. And then you've got Adam Schiff holding these hearings for impeachment on, again, thin evidence. You're in the minority. So what can you do in terms of making sure the public understands this farce?
Well, I mean, I think that the recent impeachment proceedings underscore what we can do. American people, can make up their own minds, and they're watching literally as Republicans have both hands tied behind our back in an unfair process where someone like Adam Schiff gets to be the judge and the prosecutor, where they get to pick the witnesses, the order of the witnesses, the things witnesses are allowed to talk about. They can see how contrived this is. They can see how unfair it is. And yet they can see that the Democrats are still losing. Poll after poll coming out, particularly in battleground states, showing that these impeachment proceedings, even with all of those lopsided home court advantages that the Democrats keep cooking up, changing the rules to work to their advantage, they're still losing. So that's what I'm going to continue to do, is make the points, whether it's 5 minutes at a time in a hearing where that's all I get to say, it makes a difference, because that, speaking to the American people directly about these things, they're smart enough to know when something doesn't look or smell right.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's true. You only get 5 minutes. It's really hard to make the case, but you've been doing a terrific job. Real quick before you go, Congressman, are you expecting to vote on USMCA this week?
Yeah, I think the Democrats, as their Titanic goes down on this impeachment thing, realize that they have to pivot. You know, the president saying they are do-nothing Democrats really is resonating with the American people. Yesterday, as Democrats kept saying impeachment's the most important thing we can be doing, most Americans were thinking, no, the cost of my prescription drugs, passing bills that'll take those costs down, that's important. Or USMCA, getting that passed as a farmer or a rancher so that I can do the things that I need to do to take care of my family, that's a lot more important than some contrived, desperate attempt to remove a president that I just hate.
Yeah, and I know that you are dropping that prescription drug bill as well. Congressman, it's good to see you as always.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
Maria.